I think one of the key things that we had talked about a couple weeks back is kind of the narrative that I think a lot of institutions are facing right now, which is how do they solve or how do they see real ROI on these generative AI use cases?
Right.
I think every company globally that's been doing Gen AI experimentation over the last year has been asking that question as this 2024 season starts to kind of wind down as they move to 2025 planning.
Right.
And we talked about, or you talked about how it really should be considered a data fabric plus generative AI storyline,
Right.
because I think the stat or the kind of the number you said is roughly 80% of the challenges could be addressed with a data fabric solution. So maybe I'll just stop there, see if you have any thoughts to kick us off.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really even much more than that. Because one of the things that generative AI is doing, and the run to large language models and the modeling that we're doing generally for analytics, is bringing in all new data sets as well. Classically, what we've done is data management, data governance around structured data. So, like core banking systems, things like that, where we've done data curation, discovery, classification, data quality management, et cetera. And for most enterprises, this is still a relatively manual process. So, one of the approaches that we have now is really automating that using machine learning at that level. So, and introducing the idea of the concept of data steward robots. So instead of data stewards doing that work, we're letting the machine learning algorithms do it, and focus the data stewards really at a rules and policy management and enforcement level, around that. And then now add to that, when you bring in generative AI, we're now bringing in other sets of data. So unstructured data, classically for IBM, it's been the world of FileNet and other areas. But bringing all that unstructured data together, you've got to manage that in the same way that we've done with structured data. So in most enterprises, they just kind of have their unstructured data sitting off in various places. And then the third kind of category is public data sets. And public data sets, news feeds, everything that's out there is really one of the things that gives generative AI its capability, but it's also the danger zone. That's where you import, hallucinations and other things. And so having a data management, data fabric, data function that covers all three of those data types is really important. And so we're really expanding our data governance standards and methodologies for how do you pull those things together so that we can create a common method and a common set of rules and policies that can then get implemented. Now we tie that together as we go up the food chain to the analytic level, where we have AI governance, and we have things like open pages and other methods of doing model management, and connecting those two worlds together so that you can get trusted information out of generative AI. And this is the big thing that all these chief data officers, all the chief analytic officers are really focused on, of trying to get to that level where they can do it. And then obviously line of business, that I spent a lot of time working with, could be a chief marketing officer, chief risk officer, chief compliance officer, et cetera. That, they're kind of deathly afraid of applying some of this technology because of that. Because can they trust it? If they're applying it in a risk management area to really drive credit risk and risk exposure, risk concentrations, or whether they're doing it to do regulatory reporting, which has to be auditable and how do they do that? One of the places we're getting a lot of traction and really accelerating our engagement with clients is exactly in this area. Because there's really no other vendor I see out there doing it. Everyone, all the different vendors have niche things. The hyperscalers are focused on their platform. And most of these enterprises have a distributed data topology. And what that means is they've usually got multiple cloud zones and multiple hyperscalers. They've got on premise, and they've got mainframes, and they have what we kind of call the industry data sprawl, where they continue to get additional data sources. And how do they get their hands around that? How do they manage and control that? And how do they get more efficient as an enterprise? And these are the really key aspects to it, and why when we can now drive the whole data platform, all of the data fabric stuff through the lens of generative AI. It really makes a powerful message. And a lot of these workshops now we're doing are, you could almost call these generative AI readiness sessions. How, are you ready for it? What gaps do you have in your enterprise? And then we lay out these roadmaps for them, to do it. And this is really where we're seeing this globally. In the past couple of months, I've been to Singapore, I've been to Europe, I've been here in Brazil, where I'm actually sitting right now, as well as the U.S. market. I spent some time in India as well. So it's a global, phenomenon. I think the U.S. is leading in a lot of cases, but all these other countries and organizations are following.
Yeah. I think they're starting to, obviously everyone was really excited about GenAI just because of
Yeah.
what it is. It's
Yeah.
spectacular. A lot of people can use it from a personal standpoint. Obviously you mentioned when you get up to the, AI for business, you're dealing with a lot more rules and regulations. There's a lot more risk. You don't want things to have, you don't want it to be producing anything it shouldn't be producing or accessing data that it shouldn't be accessing. And so I think there's a lot of studies now as we're getting after about a year that it shows. I think Gartner mentioned in a study that I read last week saying roughly 30% of GenAI projects are going to be kind of shut down next year. And I think that makes sense because people were experimenting, businesses were experimenting. Yep. But one thing that I've just seen in conversation is people are saying we need to find the right use case, which I agree with, but I'm curious your thoughts. Do you think it's that companies aren't finding the right use cases, or do you think it's more to do with what you just mentioned, that they're not actually ready to move these use cases into production?
Yeah, it's definitely the latter that you're talking about, because they don't have the data or anything. And I think they go into generative AI a lot of times thinking about it as just data science, as just how I'm going to apply it, not thinking that this isn't going to be successful unless I have all the data to support it. And then when you start talking about large language models and a lot of the applications of generative AI against the use cases, depending on what industry you're in, all of a sudden you're now bringing in not just your structured data in a bank, like core banking and things, but you're also bringing in, like I said, all the unstructured data. So this can be everything from contracts to emails to call center things to various other types of things. And you have a lot of industries that are trying to do that right now, but they're suddenly realizing they're woefully behind in terms of their data management functions to support generative AI. And then public data sets, like I said, are, this is the, kind of the danger zone, because being able to get all the data mined out of news feeds, regulatory filings, public information, all of this, it's a gold mine to really be able to connect it. And we do this in banking and financial markets a lot, where we build information around an entity, which can be a person or a corporation or or an issuer of a financial markets product, and really being able to capture all that, but knowing what is good and what is not. So it also takes match processing, identity resolution, a lot of these other areas, and moves it also into real time, because a lot of the applications now for generative AI and for application modernization are moving things out of the batch world into the real time world. And if you look at 80-90% of the companies that are out there, they're still running off these legacy batch oriented are systems that are, need to be modernized. That need to be, have a data fabric process around them to really bring them together. And then how do you govern it? So data governance becomes really critical, and it's not the data governance of old. This is governance around structured, unstructured, and public data sets, and the ability to drive rules and policies and rules and policy enforcement so that you have trusted information coming out. And then how do you tie that together with the world of analytics, the world of AI, the world of generative AI, where you may be running neural networks and other things that don't operate like traditional data systems. You're not dealing with rows and columns. You have a thinking system, and you've got to be able to tie the lineage, the audit trails and things into that environment. And we have the capability of doing it. We have the right methodologies and things to actually do it. And there's a question. I run a lot of these CDO summits for IBM worldwide. We did one in New York recently. We had 135 chief data officers and chief analytic officers, and from all the major Wall Street banks and everywhere. And this was the primary question they were asking. How do I do that? And case in point, just another anecdotal, thought here is, these chief data officers, chief analytic officers, they get hired into these companies. The expectations are really high, and rarely are they able to deliver on it. They live what I call quiet lives of desperation, trying to make process forward, and their life expectancy is like 2 to 3 years at a typical enterprise because they don't deliver it, and they get tossed out and they bring somebody else in. And one of the things that we feed right into with our workshops and our methods is, I want to do this top-down engagement. So I really talk with the chief data officers, talk with the analytic officers, as well as the line of business executives. And then we give them a roadmap. We help them develop their data and AI strategy around this that gives them a solution and a holistic view. And part of the workshops are, what are the gaps you have in terms of being able to adopt generative AI and become an AI-driven enterprise? And that's the magic sauce that we're driving right now. That's really getting the traction in the market.
Yeah. One question, because I like how you've separated the 3 types of data that we're now leveraging when it comes to GenAI, right? Structured, unstructured, and it was public, correct?
Right.
And I know that, so I've been in the world of data and AI for about 5-6 years now. And so I'm very familiar with kind of the process of, I think it was coined the AI ladder, right? Collect, organize, analyze, and fuse. And I know that there's plenty of vendors out there that have data fabric solutions, and our clientele have been trying to do this for years and have implemented it at different phases and different points. But now introducing GenAI, right? So now, because I think you also alluded to, is like presenting or attacking a data fabric strategy with GenAI in mind.
Yes.
Is there a particular aspect of data fabric, of a data fabric strategy that has to be approached differently than what we had previously done with traditional ML, traditional AI, and business insights?
Great question, and absolutely yes. And because traditionally the way we approached data fabric was really structured data focused, and we have methods of doing data curation. So you do discovery, you do classification, you do data quality management. You build a knowledge catalog or a catalog around it, and you create a virtualized environment that can be accessed, so you get access control and privacy controls. And what happens at most companies is all that stuff, I would say 80% of the companies out there is still manually done. And so they call that their data fabric, and it is, but it's just a manual process where they have manual people doing this stuff. The first step is now automate all that. So you have one platform. You got machine learning driven automation that's driven from the rules and policies so that you can actually do enforcement and you can have scale and ingestion. But now bring in unstructured data. You've got all sorts of contractual documents, regulatory documents, you got emails, you got these call centers. All of this unstructured data world needs to be governed like we've governed structured data. So, and that's a whole developing, method. We've got some capability with FileNet, but it's got to get a whole lot better so that you can actually have this tied together. And then, what are the methods for putting data governance and management around public data sets? That this is where IBM Research and the analytics teams have been trying to create data sets that are trusted, that we stand behind, so that, because this has been one of the issues with the models. I mean, you've got a lot of the Wall Street banks that have just shut down everybody's usage of generative AI because it was like dangerous, from a standpoint of their business. So it's fundamentally changed, and it takes now into all those things. And most enterprises and customers are ill-equipped to do that. Most of their data and AI people are structured data people. They're not unstructured public data sets. It's a whole new world. And you almost have to have your mind in your head in the models, in how that data is going to be consumed, and what are your large language models and how is that structured? Because large language models in a lot of ways have pushed the integration point down, and that instead of having like a silo of I've got a data mart and I've got a business intelligence thing, or I wrote an application. Now you're really integrating that data underneath a large language model, and then you're consuming it. And it's not just large language models, it's all sorts of different kinds of models that we have that we'll apply to actually address different use cases and different problems. And then a whole new layer of governance around AI governance, model management, model governance, and how do you actually put these things into production and then maintain them when you've got such a distributed data topology, typically, that's going to cause you to, maybe develop your models here, but deploy them over there. And again, the mainframe becomes very relevant here, particularly in the banking sector and other places, because that's still where all the data sits. And so you may develop models and things in distributed or in the cloud, but when you actually run the model, you probably want to run it back in the mainframe so you don't have to move the data so much. And so there's a whole optimization aspect, of this as well.
Yeah. So it sounds, just, I think summarizing it, it's when you move the data fabric strategy down a little bit in terms of the integration and kind of like you said, working on the governance of the models, distribution of those, optimization of where they're run. Yep. You have to slightly rethink how you're approaching your data fabric strategy, governing for unstructured data sets. And then, you've got a whole new set of problems that you're now seeing enterprises trying to overcome. So I think that's kind of where it seems like that's where we're at. And that's why you're seeing articles or conversations like the ones you're having of saying, the original hype of GenAI is real. There's ways in which you have literally seen it be able to kind of augment different business processes or even create new types of services. But now that we're getting into, we're trying to put this into production, these are the challenges that we're now being faced with.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what makes it so exciting at IBM, because, this is the magic sauce. This is what we can bring to these enterprise customers. And I don't see any of our competition doing that. You've got the hyperscalers selling cloud services. You've got various software vendors selling the magic tools. People are not putting all this together in a solution that drives to the application level, to the modernization and the use case, and bringing it all the way down through how they actually implement this. And this is what our core workshops are all about. You can see the traction, you can see the pipeline starting to build now. So
yeah, if our clients understand and can execute on the holistic kind of data fabric strategy geared towards Gen AI, and they're moving into addressing some of these new types of challenges that are introduced because of Gen AI, right? Let's just say they can follow our strategy, or kind of take our strategy, augment it slightly, but they're able to overcome these. Is there use cases in particular that you're excited about when it comes to Gen AI and how it can impact and drive business across various industries?
Yeah, it varies by industry. But certainly there's, we have a whole library of use cases. I'm an expert in labs. We spend a lot of time with client engineering and really, driving. I spend a lot of time with IBM Consulting as well. Really driving at what these use cases are. When you get into the data in a deep way, it is very industry focused. So, like banking, financial markets, insurance, there are kind of different kinds of use cases that come out of there, and having the data knowledge is critical to be able to understand how to manage and how to deal with that data. So, yeah. And again, there's a whole library, we have a whole library of them that we're using.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, Tim, I think understanding the approach of how to leverage a data fabric strategy with Gen AI is not something that I've heard broadly. So I really appreciate you kind of walking through that, because I think it's really important to understand where some of these hiccups actually are happening.
Yeah,
I
and
guess.
what's interesting is we're also trying to use a little bit different language
Okay.
because data fabric, people immediately jump to what we've been doing for the past 5 to 10 years, which is really structured data focus. When what we really mean is something completely different. So it's almost a fabric for AI or something. And so I tend to talk about it in different terms, and then all of a sudden they'll wake up and say, "Oh, I recognize this." And how you then connect it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it would be good if we could get some of our marketing programs kind of around this. But we certainly are. I'm working with marketing at a lot of the chief data officer summits and all these other things where we're actually making connections, becoming trusted advisors, building pipelines. But yeah, we've got a golden opportunity here to step into this void.
Love it. Awesome. All right, Tim. Well, I'll stop the recording there, but I appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to talk with you.
Yep.